Is there a way to confirm that a purchaser got a webinar invite in Zoom?
And so this is what we just talked about. Go to the drop down.
That's what we'll do to end.
Stop live stream.
Got it. Okay.
That's where we.
Before we leave.
That's
the
what
meeting.
we have to do stuff. Okay.
Yeah. So remember when we kept.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
okay. So I think just need to unmute everybody.
Is everybody on? No.
They do their own.
Oh, they do. Okay.
Where's Kim? She's not on there.
I just saw.
Right
We're
here.
two, Counselor.
She's right here.
Okay,
She
she
doesn't
is.
have her camera on.
Okay.
Okay, we're all set to go?
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Jack.
We live now?
Yes.
Bye-bye. Yep.
Good evening, council. Everybody can hear?
Is everybody here?
Good. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Any conflict of interest amongst council members here tonight? Seeing none. Before we adopt the published agenda, Rob's got an addition. Go ahead, Rob.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just one item looking to add. There's a notice of motion to be presented on behalf of Councillor Verbeek. If we could add that to item 15.3 to this evening's agenda.
That's fine. Thank you. I need a motion to adopt the published agenda with the change. Go ahead, the addition. Councillor Bowman and Councillor Bjorkman. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. I need the adoption of the minutes of the regular meeting, June 15th, please. Councillor or Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Vanendel. All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. And we'll go right into public presentations. And the first one's Mike Cowan from BDO. Mike, if you're ready.
Yep.
We're ready for you. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all again. Might be some new faces, I think. So just to introduce myself, Mike Cowan, partner with BDO in Essex. We've been doing the audit now for several years. So been coming to these meetings to present the statements around this time every year. So as usual, I'd like to thank Jeff and Kate and the rest of the team in assisting us, especially this year with how challenging it's been with all the changes and the fact that it was virtually done remotely and just a lot of differences in how we had to do things. So thank you very much for your support and helping us get through the audit. So what we're doing tonight is going through the statements. They're in draft mode. I don't anticipate they will change from the meeting, but that's up to council to approve them. I have gone through them very closely with your team, so they've analyzed and accepted them to present to council at this point. So I'm going to, if we could scroll down to the report, which on the PDF pages should be PDF 3 and 4. So our audit report is 2 pages. It's been a couple pages for a while now. It has been reordered though in the past couple of years to kind of emphasize things more clearly. So our opinion, which used to be the very last thing in the report, is now the first thing. And essentially this is a clean opinion of the statements to indicate that the financial statements as presented are in accordance with the accounting standards that we're following, and they're noted in the notes to the statements as well. So we use PSAB, which is Public Sector Accounting Standards, and some of you may or may not remember pre-PSAB, where we used to see the statements in more of a cash flow type perspective. So how you budget for your general operations, but you also budget for capital. Well, with PSAB, we show the capital assets on the balance sheet, essentially. So just to continue on with the report before we get into that, the basis for the opinion, again, says it's under PSAB. The responsibilities of management, so these are your statements. We do assist in the preparation of the statements, but it indicates that management's responsible for making sure that these statements are theirs, and that the town can continue as a going concern. Which when you see the numbers, you'll see that it is a fairly healthy statement. That's not what our report is indicating, but it's definitely a good report, I think. So if you move on to the next page, it's the end of the report, which speaks to our responsibilities. So it kind of goes into details as to how we do things, risk assessment, how we, different things we do in terms of checking things. We can't check everything, obviously, so we do certain testing, and to help us come to the opinion that we already spoke of. And then you'll note that the date of the report is today. Presumably, again, the statements would get approved, and they would be as of today. Now, I know I was talking to Kate earlier today. I think we're still waiting on 1 or 2 responses to legal letters, just a standard procedure where we just check in with the lawyers that you deal with. So hopefully we'll have those this week. If we get them this week, we should be able to continue with that date. We may have to bump the date because we have to do it within so many days of having everything in our file. So if we move on to the next page, the consolidated statement of financial position. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this page and the next, and then I'll kind of go quickly through the rest. So I'm not going to belabor this hopefully, but I want to give you enough information. So you'll see financial assets. You'll see the cash and cash equivalents of about 57 million versus 46 to 47 in the prior year. So obviously an increase of almost 10 million. The taxes receivable account is fairly consistent. If I recall, I think the number came down a bit last year, so it's remained fairly consistent. Receivables are other receivables besides taxes that are owing at the end of the year. And we've seen now the next line, the development charges have flipped into a deferred position, which is it's a good thing. It means there's more development happening, more money being collected for development. The investment in ELK sits there at 12.4 million versus 11.8, and that's 100% interest. And then long-term investments is your share of Union Water, and the note goes into a little bit more detail in that as well. On the liability front, your payables are a bit higher than the prior year, 4.2 versus about 3.7 last year. A few other current liabilities, some accrued interest, employee future benefits, where every few years an actuarial report is completed to kind of determine what that liability is based on estimated lives and staff complement, etc. I already mentioned the development charges, how we've seen that flip into a liability position, and the net long-term debt of 18.7 million versus about 20.7 million. So that's come down about 2 million from the prior year. So the next component is non-financial assets, and I already touched on the fact that we see capital assets on the balance sheet. So we have $184 million worth of assets. That's when we first started showing these on the statements several years ago. We had we gone through and created the cost of these assets and then the depreciation. And then over the years, you've added and taken things away. So that's the net book value, so cost less depreciation on these assets. And then we have some prepaids and inventories that make up the difference. So when you see that accumulated surplus of 229, it's a bit deceiving in the sense that surplus used to mean you have that money to spend. This is the total asset position, so it's got the tangible capital assets, etc., everything in there. And even if you back off the tangible capital assets, doesn't necessarily mean your current surplus is a significantly large number. I will point that out a little bit later, because every year, typically, when you do have a surplus, you use that in your budgeting for, if not the next year, the year after that, typically. So I'll just pause there for a second, but we're going to move on to the next page. Assuming if there are any questions, we'll deal with them at the end. But so the next page here is the consolidated statement of operations and accumulated surplus. This is, for all intents and purposes, the income statement of the town. So you can see 3 columns. The first column is the budget, the second column is the actual for the current year, and then the third column is the actual for the prior year. So you'll see often that you're obviously not going to hit budget every time due to various things. Obviously, you had budgeted in the third line for more grants, and what was actually realized was more in line with the prior year. So to look at what actually happened for the year in that second column, you see about $43 million of total revenue. And again, this isn't necessarily cash flow, because there could be some differences in cash flow in the pre-PSAB way of doing things versus PSAB. But we'll speak more to that in a moment. But again, that revenue is up almost $2 million over the prior year. And then when we look at expenses, we see the broken down by the different categories: general government, protection of person and property, et cetera, et cetera. For the most part, you see things relatively line up with the budget, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the same as the prior years. It depends on projects you have planned, et cetera, et cetera. So you do see a surplus that's in excess of budget, but again, it could be due to timing of certain things. The fact that something like the ELK share of income doesn't get budgeted for. There's those types of things that you can see in the revenue line don't get budgeted for. So again, that surplus is not a cash surplus, it's an accounting surplus. So I will speak to that again, as I said, as we go a little bit further into these statements. The next page, and as I said, I'm going to start kind of moving a little quicker, but this is the statement of consolidated statement of changes in net financial assets. So it says, okay, you have a surplus of 8.2. How did your net financial assets change by 9.9 million, which you see the third number from the bottom. So this just explains, yeah, you had some additions of 3.9 million. And as you can see, it looks like you budgeted for significantly more in additions, but it just depends on timing of when things are finished and when things actually come to fruition. And amortization of tangible capital assets of about 6.8 million, which is not a cash item. It's depreciating those assets. The next page is the statement of cash flow, and it takes your surplus and says, okay, well, how did you get from that down to a change in cash of almost 10 million, as I pointed out? Again, it points out a few different areas of where there were additions, where there was debt paid, where there's changes in cash, non-cash items or cash items. And so we get, again, just a little bit more information for the user to look at and say, how did you get to that cash flow change? So as we move along now, we start to get to more into the verbiage behind some of the numbers. So if you're wondering how something is treated, the notes will explain a little bit more in terms of that. For instance, as we go along, just what's showing up on the screen right now, it shows the basis of consolidation. So what it does get consolidated with the town in terms of things like that. So I don't usually spend a lot of time on these things because they don't change year over year in any great detail. But if we do fast track a couple pages to note 2, you'll see a note on the investment in ELK, and it shows how that value comes to be, and that there's when you guys purchased the rest of ELK several years ago, there was a premium paid, and that's being amortized over time. And then the next page after that shows some numbers from ELK's financial statements, just to give a little bit more detail. If we continue along on the next note, you'd see the Union Water information, and again, very consistent year over year in terms of what we provide. I'll move along to note 5, which is the net long-term debt note. And several years ago, we broke this out to show the user fee supported debt, which includes the water treatment plants and those types of things, where user fees support that. Then you have the property tax supported debt in the next section, which includes the arena, capital works debenture, et cetera, and we go down to debt that relates to benefiting property owners in the third part. So again, just there's quite a bit of detail here in terms of all the different types of debt outstanding. And then near the end, we show what the expected principal payments are on, I think it's the 18th page of the PDF, just a little bit lower. You'll see the principal payments for the next 5 fiscal years and thereafter. So generally speaking, the debt is, as you pay down debt, you tend to pay more principal, less interest. And that's why you see a kind of a gradual increase in that principal being paid. And this would be if no further debt was taken on over the next few years, which is probably unlikely, but at this point, that's what exists. I will next point out note 7, which is on the next page of the PDF, and it just breaks down a little bit more detail of how that surplus comes to be. It does show that a lot of the surplus is not tied up, but has been set aside in terms of reserves and reserve funds. And obviously, a town of this size, you need to have adequate reserves, and you have to plan for capital changes over time. So you see the breakdown at the bottom there of capital purposes of about almost $34 million being set aside, landfill of 10.5, et cetera, et cetera. So a big part of that surplus, when I said if you just subtract the assets and you see a big number, doesn't necessarily mean it's available cash, but it's in reserves that you have set aside for certain purposes. If we continue along, there's a little bit more information. I'm not going to focus on too many of these notes as we get to, there's note 13 just shows the budget. And again, in common with the way many municipalities do it, you budget kind of on the old basis of in terms of cash flow. And this just kind of tries to take, well, the budget that you had planned for versus how does it show up in the statements. And obviously you see it shows like a rather large negative, and then almost it flips over to a positive because of the way things are accounted for. To continue along, there's some more information about tangible capital assets. Note 16 talks about just with everything going on with COVID-19 and the unknown, just speaking to, we don't really know what the full impact's going to be when everything comes back to whatever sort of new normal we end up having. It's just providing when you look at the reserves, you look at the cash position, no major issues or concerns, but just providing a little bit of information saying there's a lot of things we don't know, and that's just providing the user to say, hey, we can't evaluate all this because we don't really know, but we're doing okay for where we're at, but we'll see where things take us at that point, basically. The next couple pages break down the capital assets. So you have a page for 2019 and also a page for 2018, just showing the additions and a little bit more detail by category. And then the next schedule, schedule 2, breaks down things by those different departments that we saw on the income statement, just to show how the revenues and expenses are allocated amongst those. And finally, the trust statements. So these are items that you take care of, but they're not necessarily owned by the town. So for the most part, it's you see the trust funds there that are sitting there and the statement of continuity that relate to those. There is not a lot of activity in those. That's just basically interest income and then some transfers and things to take care of certain things. But at the end of the day, not huge numbers when we're talking about what we've seen on the other numbers, but again, has to be reported and not part of the town assets. So it does show up separately. So again, I'll open it up and see if there's any questions. I try to do a kind of a high level review, nothing, hopefully don't bore you too much, but I know it's important that you understand these numbers. So I will leave it at that, and we'll see if there's any questions or anything else to go over here.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to open it up to council. Any questions from any of the councilors tonight? Councillor Bondi, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is specifically to note number 2, the investment in Elk Energy, where the town holds 100% of the investment at the balance that represents the town's share at acquisition. So I really have a hard time that on our books, an asset that we own solely is in our books as at acquisition, because we may want to sell it to pay off debt, to do roads because we don't want to manage it anymore. And so it is an asset. So I think, we're also charged with governance for overseeing the town's financial reporting. And I believe that's part of us, that's council. So I really think we need to put our assets into our audit here. Looking at these financial assets, I know that even if we got a value point at Elk, it's only a value at one point in time, but we really don't know what the value is. So I'm just wondering why we continue to do the value in our audited financial statements when it's at acquisition, when we really need to know if it's more or less. And this is an important topic in our municipality. If we are the owners of a multi-million-dollar organization, we should have some idea of its value. And from talks with town staff and myself, I was an Elk board member. It seems that nobody really knows, unless I can be corrected right now, what the value is of Elk. And if we know the value of elk, we need to start writing that down so we can see if there's a decline or an increase in it. This is just like one of our other investments, right? We need to, I see in there that the reported earnings this year are gone down. So we need to keep an eye on that as well. But this is a question which is hence leads into the notice of motion that I have later on tonight. So do we have that value of elk if we were to sell it today?
Could I attempt to answer that?
Go ahead, Mike.
So first off, the statements have to show the value of elk on them it is at acquisition, but it also includes, it says undistributed earnings. So that $11.696 million you see there prior to adding the purchase premium in the note, that ties to what the net assets of elk are according to their statements. So your value on your statements is exactly equal to their value if you look at their statements. However, I cannot speak to the true fair value of it because number one, that's not what we're doing in the audit. If you wanted to understand the value, you'd probably need to hire a chartered business valuator to help you come up with that. I mean, there are rules of thumb out there, which I'm not going to speak to because I don't know what the rules of thumb are for it. But having said that, I mean, and if you were to go back and look and see what you paid to buy out the others, it might give you an idea of what it could be worth. But it's not something that is required to be in the audit statements, although I hear what you're saying. To know what the value of your investment makes sense. Just whether or not you need to know that right now and whether that's going to make you change some decisions or do different things.
Thank you, Mike. Anybody else from council? Nobody else from council? Thanks for the report, Mike, and I think I'm going to need a motion to receive the report. Hold on.
Yeah,
to adopt the
as presented.
As presented, please. Councillor Bowman and Councillor Vandendal, all in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thank you, Mike.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, under reports from administration, we have under 8.1 our Chief Administrative Officer's update on the town's response and in relation to COVID-19.
Go ahead, Chris.
All right, thank you, Worship. So tonight, I'm going to pass the reins to Doug, the Director of Community Services, as well as the Deputy CEO. The focus really of discussion tonight is the beach, the steps we've taken, the proposed options on or recommendations for security and signage, and that ties into splash pads as well. So I'm going to let Doug take over. I've got really nothing new, I guess, from the last meeting in terms of what's happening at Town Hall or what's happening within the region. Jeff spoke to finances the previous meeting. So again, I'm going to let Doug take over here.
Thank you, Chris. Go ahead, Doug.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to update council on 4 areas. And the first 2 actually will need some direction from council. The last 2 just kind of update in terms of community service and what's happening with COVID. So the first one is beaches, and the second one would be splash pads, which may be tied together based on the conversation council had at the last meeting. So council directed administration to close the beach. We've had signage prepared. We've gone out and got line location where the signs will go on the beach in all 6 of our parking lots. So those all should be up by the end of this week. Clerks have been working with us to amend the current parking bylaw. So if council does go towards enforcement, we want to make sure our bylaw is up to date so they can provide proper tickets. One of the things, just want to make sure council supports this, was Lot B, which is on the north side of Sullivan, adjacent to the current wreck. We're putting in there that only boat trailers are allowed in that lot from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. daily. After 1 p.m. till 10 o'clock, when no parking after that, it's open to boat trailers or cars. So that's what we're recommending now, and that's what on the current signage. Based on our previous discussions, we also looked at some options. So if we're going to have signage, what about enforcement? So I met with a third party that can provide enforcement of parking and also beach security. The parking enforcement, they provide their own car and a staff in a uniform. Beach security is a uniformed staff. Unfortunately, they cannot enforce the bylaws. They would have to call either OPP or bylaw enforcement. However, you would have a person in uniform on site for a full 7 hours. The earliest that the third party could start is Friday, July 17th. With current COVID, they are obviously very busy in terms of providing parking enforcement and security. So Friday, July 17th, the earliest they could provide a service to us. Basically, also we ask for that service could be from Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so the weekends and holidays, and it'd be 12 noon to 7 p.m. The service I went from July 17th to the end of Labor Day, so it'd be a total of 8 weeks, and it would have 2 holidays in there. The cost for those 8 weeks and for the parking and beach is a total of $13,045. $8,114 is for parking, and just under $5,000 is for beach security. If the beach does reopen and council goes in the direction of third-party enforcement, we would still look at having our OPP and our current bylaw enforcement down there Monday to Thursday on regular patrols, because they could still ticket for parking or on the beach. I've already contacted the health unit for more inspections to assist with smoking hookahs 7 days a week. Currently all public washrooms in the boaters lounge are open. So in terms of the beach, a couple options that council can look at is remain status quo, which the beach remains closed. You could open it, but with no enforcement, or open with a third-party enforcement with the earliest of date would be Friday, July 17th. So depending on council direction, if it was enforcement, we would have all parties, third-party, OPP, BALA, and our staff together to kind of coordinate all this. In addition to all that, no matter which direction council goes, we're already going to do a marketing campaign. Alex has a website set up, essex.ca/Colchester Beach, which has weather forecasts, the parking maps, other information for that area. So that will be going live no matter what. And if council decides of a date to open up the beach, just keep in mind that we do need time to take the fencing down, get the Moby mat out, and get totally ready. So that's the first one in terms of the beach. I'm not sure if council wants to talk now on the beach or want me to go on with splash pads. I'm not sure if you want to tie those together or not.
Up to council. Council, you want to talk about the beaches first? Go ahead, Councillor Guerin. Go ahead, Councillor Guerin.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just on a couple of things you just mentioned, Doug. First of all, the lot that you mentioned with the boat trailers up until 1 p.m. and then after 1 p.m. other cars can pull in. Will any of the cars pulling in after 1 impede or obstruct or prevent any of the existing boat trailers not to get out? And then the second question I have on the beach is on the signage and the rules and the bylaws and the enforcement. Will all those rules and bylaws be able to be enforced, and will people be able to be ticketed?
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. Yeah, to Councillor Guerin, on your first question, previously that's how the lot has always been in the past, where it's been a free-for-all. So hopefully by just having boat trailers in, talking with users of the boat ramp, our staff, it seems a lot of the boats are out by 11 to 1 o'clock. So we think, well, there will be multiple vehicles in there, but hopefully we can kind of control it some way, which has been the past. So I think we will be okay for the most part. In terms of your second question, that is, unless we have some type of enforcement, and that's why we looked at a third-party enforcement company, they can issue tickets. One thing I didn't mention with the third-party enforcement, only thing we need to supply to them is our tickets. So they could supply them for what's in our bylaws in terms of illegal parking, basically anything to do with parking, double parking in the wrong spaces, on the road where they shouldn't be. Yes, they can give tickets.
Thank you. Go ahead, further.
Okay, yeah, just further that then. So, because I've seen the Wasaga Beach having lots of problems up there, and I think Grand Bend, and they were handing out quite a few tickets. Who would we be able to hand out tickets for things like social distancing measures or anything along those lines? And are you telling me that all the laws we have down, and whether it's no barbecues, they're all enforceable by fine?
Dear Mr. Mayor, so yes, we have no barbecues, no smoking. A lot of the parking issues are all actually bylaws, so we can enforce those with tickets. In terms of social distancing, I think it's a matter of just talking to the groups. That's not part of our bylaw. I think the OPP may have more of a presence, but I don't think we can actually ticket for that, just encourage people to move on. And sorry, Mr. Mayor, I just want to add to council in terms of beaches, just so we're aware. The only beach that is open in our area right now is Seacliff Beach in Leamington. They are using the same third-party contractor. Windsor will be opening up their beach, but not until August 4th. And sorry, Tecumseh didn't have one, and I never heard back from Bell River Lakeshore what they're doing with theirs. So that may be another factor for council to consider.
Thank you, Doug. Anybody else? Councillor Bjorkman, go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think a big part of the conversation we need to have is what kind of a beach do we want to have? And that should be the first question that we answer. Do we want a family-friendly beach where the kids can be and be comfortable, young families can be and be comfortable, or do we want the party beach? And I would argue that the residents in Colchester and in Essex are looking for a family beach that they can come to, bring their kids and have a good time. That's not to say there's not going to be kids there also, but if that's what we want, we have to enforce our rules. If we don't enforce our rules, then we go back to the previous weekend when we opened up. So I think it's important that when we open, we have our security there. We have all of our bylaws ready to go and that we enforce. It doesn't take long for people to understand that you are enforcing the rules, and that will change behavior, and they will go places where they can do what it is they want to do. So I think we need to really look at that. What are we looking for? What do we want for our residents from this beach? And so I would be fine with waiting until July 17th to open up too soon, and there's nobody else in the county open except Seacliff. Then the same thing's going to have, the rush will be to Colchester, and it will be overwhelmed again. So I think we need our splash pads open, we need our pool open, we need our beach open, all at the same time, because it gives options and you don't get a crush going to one spot. And if we can do that in concert with a couple others opening, it makes it all the better for us. So I would suggest that we hold off until we can have our security and really police our beach. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Malash.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. To Doug too, and just in general comment, I'm not in any hurry to have the beach open. Same with the splash pads. And I agree with what Councillor Bjorkman was saying, where I think if regionally we're all opening beaches or splash pads at the same time, there won't be a rush to anyone's particular beach or anyone's particular splash pad services. I believe I heard today that the city of Windsor was opening up their splash pads, all of them, on July the 13th. Does that sound familiar, anybody?
Correct. Next Monday.
Next Monday. So I would imagine that we'll get some word back or some feedback on how well that went to have splash pads open across the city and what kind of rush perhaps that there is there. But I think we're going to run into the same problem if we open our beach and other beaches are not open, or if we open the beach and not the splash pads, or if we open splash pads and not the beach. I think we're going to have the same problem that we had previously. It's just going to be a convergence on those facilities, and we're going to have issues. So if that's what's going to happen, I'd prefer actually not to have them open at all. So is there any way, Mr. Sweet, that we can coordinate it across the county so that we're all sort of moving along in the same direction? I guess that's my question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. In theory, yes. From going through everything in COVID, where we try to coordinate across all municipalities, I don't think it's worked once. Everybody's kind of gone on their own and they agreed for different reasons. I sent out the survey today about beaches and splash pads and all different answers. Any interest in that? And there's really no interest. I think everybody would like to do that. It's just not working in the past for anything. And I don't know, our CEO, maybe you want to add on to that even more discussions, but we always suggest it. It just doesn't seem to work out that way.
Thank you. Go ahead, further.
Further question. Is there a regular meeting, Mr. Sweet, of all the community services or Parks and Rec or directors across the county? I know that we have them for our engineering department. I know that we have them for finance. Do we do that with community services?
Yeah, we meet at a minimum every 2 weeks, sometimes every week, depending on what's been happening with COVID. And a lot of times in that group, we're all on the same page. It's when it gets maybe higher and it gets political at the council, its decisions get changed. But we do meet at least every 2 weeks.
Thank you. That's it for me.
I think Councillor Bondi, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question about the tickets. Are they going to be under the Provincial Offences Act? And who's going to chase the money for those? You know, for example, Rick got a ticket in Brockville this week when he was working at a town, and it was a $30 parking on public property ticket, and it was $20 if you paid it right away. And it was actually, I looked at it because word on the street out there is if the town gives you a ticket, it doesn't go on your driver's license. It doesn't go on your insurance. But if it's a Provincial Offences Act, it does. So that's one of my first questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Bondi, yes, it is through the Provincial Offences Act. Your second part of that, how that works, I would defer to our clerk because I haven't been involved in terms of the ticketing. I'm not sure if our clerk can explain that more.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is that, yeah, it is considered part of provincial offenses, and it's collected in conjunction with I apologize, I forget the name of the coordinated agreement we have with all of the municipalities. And as far as the procedure, it would be, you know, very similar to tickets in other jurisdictions, but I can provide more detailed information for council.
Good. Thank you, Rob.
To follow up to that, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Clerk, Mr. Ojai. I think that having a $30 fine and then having paid early, only $20 really worked for our family. So some comments that I'm hearing from the residents down there, drop-off areas by the splash pad and more senior parking by the splash pad. If there's any way we can keep that on our radar. You know, everybody that I've talked to, you know, everybody wants the beach open, but we have to do it correctly. So if we have to wait a little bit, I think that's the best move, unfortunately. Lakeshore has closed their beach, and they have a COVID emergency team that's going to decide on when to open their beach. So it's not even going back to their council. To come see, I talked to some of the councillors there, and they want a regional approach too. So I really think we have to work harder to get that. Not saying you're not, Doug, to work harder for that, but I really think we have to lobby the other communities, because it would be nice if everybody was open at the same time. It would really spread people out. That's what I'm hearing. And the enforcement, although there's a cost to it, I think it's a necessity. And one of the ideas that got brought to my attention or just suggested is there any way we can stagger, and I don't want our own bylaw officers to be upset at me for suggesting this, but is there any way we can stagger our bylaw officers to say have Monday, Tuesdays off and then work through the week? You know, we have a couple of them now. Is that an idea at all that was discussed? Councillor Vanderdolen's given a smile, but I don't know. So from what I'm hearing down there and from what I'm seeing in our agenda further, visibility of the OPP, even when they were down there, they weren't getting out of their car enough. That was a big issue. So if we're going to pay for enforcement, I want it to be active enforcement. I don't want to pay $13,000 and not have active enforcement. So thank you, Doug and Mr. Sweet, for all your work on this. The signs look amazing. So I'm really happy to get those up. I see that there's the beach signs. I have been sharing them with some people that have asked about them, wondering if we could get some more of those curfew, like they're not a curfew sign, but it says the park is open from 6 to 10. People down there are saying that people are being loud at the park in the basketball nets all hours of the night. So that's one issue that I heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Worship. So just a couple points I want to touch on there before we let other councilors speak there. Yeah, just to reinforce what Doug said, in terms of a coordinated approach, I can speak for, I guess, all the directors. I know between Doug, Jeff, Lori, Kevin, maybe not so much Kevin in terms of infrastructure, but our groups do meet, and we've all tried to coordinate these approaches. We really have since day one. I mean, since those first meetings back in March, we tried to coordinate closures. We tried to coordinate openings. We've tried to coordinate, tax deferrals, right, to try and keep things equal. It has not been easy at all to do that. Again, there's political drive behind a lot of these decisions, and that we may agree as CAOs or directors, and then we get to the political arena and things change. So then it really falls apart. I mean, I think I joked to a counselor today. I think we'd have a hard time buying crayons together as it stands right now. It's difficult when you have different makeup, different diversity of a community, and what the needs are is different. So we definitely try. We definitely push to try and do that, because we know that it helps to do that in sense of a regional community. I think, having lived now through these beach closures, I think the appetite for opening consistently will be there. Mind you, saying that, Windsor's already told everybody when they're opening. So I think, yes, I'll reach out to Kingsville and I'll reach out to Lakeshore to see what their options are. And you're right, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. And maybe that's tying it to Windsor's Beach so that everybody's open at the same time. So that's one thing I want to talk about. The other thing, in terms of the active security and police presence, I do want to make a note that I know I had staff there on various times of the day when the police were out policing. I was down there personally in the middle of the day, unannounced. And when I got there, the police were walking the beach, both of them. So I know I've had several staff tell me that they were out active, walking and doing what we asked them to do. So whether they're getting confused on the days when the beach wasn't their focus, but when we hired them specifically to focus on the beach, they were out there. And then just the other thing to touch on in terms of, bylaw enforcement and OPP, the support has always been there and will continue to be there, right? During the week and on the weekend, right? This security, third-party security, at the end of the day, if things get to a point, they're going to have to call the OPP. The OPP has already said, we're here to support, we're here to do our jobs. It's just that we can't focus on Colchester 100% of the time when we're in your community, unless you're, paying specifically for that. So, and I think that's a fair answer by the OPP that way. So, rotating bylaw enforcement, there's contracts, there's QP agreements. It's something we can explore in terms of letter agreements. We can look at it, absolutely. I'm not sure what that outcome is going to be. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Anybody else from council? Councilor Verbeek, go ahead.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just some follow-up comments. Last Monday when we met about this, it sounds like we're all still in a similar spot where we understand the importance of opening up in a more regional approach, because whoever opens first or even second is going to have the influx of the crowds, the onslaught that are just dying to get to the beaches. And also what we threw around last week is, I still think very valid, tying the beaches to the splash pads, because if we open one without the other, that's where we're going to see an onslaught. Trying to open as much as possible at the same time. Yes, I'm very grateful that staff has done as much as they have in the past week with the signage and all the prep in case we were prepared to open. But I just don't think that as much as we all want to and our residents want us to, I don't that unless tomorrow some of our neighboring municipalities say we're opening our splash pads and our beaches, I don't think we're prepared to handle that onslaught. I think I want to ask Doug a question about this company that you've looked into for enforcement. I think it's great. I would definitely support that, the 13,000 for the 8 weeks. However, are we at risk of, if we just keep pushing this out, are we at risk of this agency maybe not being available if we drag our heels too much before we decide? And then we're back at square one, because I would, regardless of when we decide to open, I would be in support of having enforcement. Just to maintain a family-friendly beach.
To you, Mr. Mayor, 2 comments to Councillor Verbeek's comments. First one, the signage, really, as much as it's happening during this time, it's irrelevant to COVID. Those are signage that we needed anyways. So those would have gone ahead, COVID or not. In terms of this company, right now, July 17th was his earliest date because they haven't planned for this. We would discuss with them a plan and discuss with them if it doesn't open and then, at least they're ready for us. We would also have to have a bylaw to allocate them as a temporary bylaw enforcement. So that would come in front back to council as well.
Thank you. Just to go on record here, I'll listen to Councillor Guerin, and I've got something to say. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so just wanted to talk about the, if we're the only game in town and we were open, yes, we would bring people to our beaches, but Seacliff is open right now. And I'd like to ask Doug if he's heard from anyone from that municipality with respect to, it's the same company that we're looking at that's working their beach. How's it working at Seacliff? Have they seen any major issues with things bylaw related or even social distancing? Because I haven't heard anything, and they are the only game, I think, in town that are open.
To you, Mr. Mayor. The comment I received back is the first few weeks were extremely busy. They had to have assistant with security and OPP. It's actually calmed down some, so it's more normal, but they're actually looking at OPP more now for enforcement because being the only beach open, they're again starting to see more people going there. So that they're seeing that issue too, being the only one open at the current time.
Okay.
Yeah, so further to that, then yeah, I would think that with the hot weather we're getting, that's probably a good reason why the beach is getting busier and busier. It's that time of year. So you feel comfortable, Doug, with the company? Have you talked to them at all about the strategy of how they patrol it? Because I'm hearing some concerns about, the police that were doing it, and perhaps they were in the car more than they were out of the car. Have they expressed how they would actually handle it? Did you feel comfortable with that?
You, Mr. Mayor, actually had a site meeting with them, 2 of their staff. The site supervisor was there. Because we're our parking, so there's 2 elements of that, correct? The parking enforcement, and because the 7 lots are within 2 to 3 blocks of each other, they felt they would basically be walking constantly in those areas. In terms of the beach security, they would be down on the beach, walking up in the park the whole time. So the beach security wouldn't have a vehicle, so they would have to be out in the parking felt because of the location. They would be on foot as well.
Thank you. Okay, if I can just say one thing before we continue. Going to the OPP, and Chris already said he was down there. I did too. I seen the OPP walking the beach, walking the park. One cruiser was parked up on top, and one was parked down below, and they were both empty. And there was no police officers in the car. They were walking the beach, and they were walking the park also. So they did patrol pretty well. Getting to opening the beach, I want to go on record here, and I want to go on record to residents. I feel real bad at people being locked down at home, and they pretty well are. They're locked down at home in this extreme heat. And I'm sure if we opened the beach tomorrow, even without the residents from Windsor, our beach would be pretty full. But even with our residents, there's a lot of them that love to get down the beach, and I don't blame them. Who wants to be at home? But I want to go on record. I'm not going to take a chance, and I'm not going to support it, opening this beach with this COVID-19 that's going through our community. And if you listen to the radio, I'm sure we all hear it. Again today, there was 2 new cases in Windsor at shopping centers, grocery stores. So I don't want to take that chance of having a few hundred people on that beach and having one person that's infected and taking a chance of infecting our residents or residents away from our municipality. So I am not, in no way would I support opening that beach until we get really control of this COVID virus. So that's my opinion and that's my view. Thank you. Go ahead, Doug.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just to kind of add, because all the conversation seems to be the beach and splash pads. So I just want to quickly jump into splash pads. So then I can ask for direction from council in terms of beaches and splash pads.
Yeah, if you could just hold off for 1 second, Doug, Councilor Bowman had a question. Go ahead, Councilor.
Just a comment, really, and I think it's really important that we sort of move forward with the idea of the security aspect if we do open the beaches. I think it's mandatory. We have to go that way. The real issue is going to be, do we want it open, the beaches open or not? And I think the real issue is, are people going to maintain their distance? I stopped by a beach on Lake St. Clair yesterday and just pulled in to see what it was like. And I was amazed. There were a number of people there, but they were social distancing. You could see the families gathering together, and there was a legitimate space between the groups. And it seemed to be working well. I didn't see anybody policing in there at that place. But I think because of our history, I think it's important that we go through with that. I like the idea of everybody in the area opening at the same time. It just makes more sense. It spreads everybody out, and to move forward with that. But the big portion is, I think we have to be ready to move when everybody else is. So I would think it's imperative that Doug sort of get everybody in line. So when the hour of opening happens, that we're all ready to go at that time. So I wasn't in favor of closing the beach. I was in favor of, if it's the first time, is maintaining the security. In retrospect, I don't think we would have been able to get the security in place quick enough. So the couple of weeks we've had it closed, I think has been a good move. So when we opened it, I think it's mandatory that we have the people in place to make sure that things are happening as they should be. And that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Councilor Van Dolen, you were next.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Sorry, I fumbled with my button there. Yeah, I'm still in favor of opening the beach, and if the rest of the county are going to be opening theirs, then whenever they open, I'm fine with going along with the same timing. But I disagree with you, Mr. Mayor, about keeping it closed until we have a handle on COVID, because that could be never. That means we'd never reopen the beach because COVID's not going away. So I think we might as well just open with our neighboring communities. And I think it's obvious we have to put security there of some kind. I'd like to remind my fellow councilors that, police officers are also covered by basic labor law. I mean, they're allowed to take a break, they're allowed to sit down, they're allowed to go into the air conditioning for a while. So just because you don't see them there, well, they have a right to not be there when they're working because they get breaks. Personally, I've seen them patrolling on foot. I've seen them standing around. I've seen them sitting in their cars, and I've seen the cars empty and the officers nowhere to be seen. But in every case, their control is still evident as long as the car is there, because the people who would cause trouble know that a solution to their problem, their trouble, is not too far away. It's too bad that we have to pay for security, but I think that a busy beach with a few problems is a lot preferable to an empty family beach with no problems. I mean, it's not just the money and the effort. There's some basic issues of freedom here. I mean, yes, teenagers and young people can be pains in the you-know-what, but so were we. People have a right to be young. They have a right to cause a fuss sometimes. And it's up to us as adults to control it. That security company, I've spent a few days recently on the beach right near the Leamington Public Beach, and they don't seem to have terrific control. Leamington has had exactly the same issues we had a couple of weeks ago when we closed our beach, and it's the same people too. So I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm willing to try it. And finally, I just think it's terrible that we're conflating the beach issue with the splash pads. I think they're completely separate. Like one's out of town teenagers raising hell, and the other one's moms with toddlers, you know. And I don't think that the splash pads are going to be overwhelmed or be a trouble. Maybe there'll be a lineup for them, but I have no doubt that the mothers of young children will do everything in their power to protect their own kids. I mean, come on, we've all seen it. A mother will not allow her kids to be put at risk. So I think we should open the splash pads now. The worst heat in years. People should have access to this relief, and we should rely on the good sense of mothers to look after their own kids. Thanks.
Thank you. Doug, you were going to speak on splash pads. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Vanderdolen, for that lead-in for splash pads. So just an update, refresher for council for our 3 splash pads. You have them ready. The health unit came out last week. For most part, they were good. They asked us to address some of our forms that said weekly to change those to daily. And they wanted the signage up about social distancing and that so they could actually see it. So we have all that in place and ready. And they said they can come back tomorrow and Wednesday of this week to review. And if we're good, we could open. Just a reminder on that, they had their guidelines that you could put fencing around it and staff it so then you can control who could go in and out of the splash pads. If we did that for our 3 splash pads, again, same timelines, it would cost you just under $32,000. Only reason I bring that up, when Windsor does open up next Monday, they are putting fencing and staffing there. We do not need to do that, but I'm just making council aware, if you're looking at copying other ones, that is what one is doing when they do open up. But health unit has told us that's not going to be enforced. It's a best practice. So that's up to every municipality and how they handle that. So based on discussion on beaches and splash pad, I think as administration, we're just looking at some direction from council. Do you want us to start planning to have enforcement as discussed tonight? Do we want to wait a date to when we officially open, or just, again, wait to our next meeting? Kind of looking for direction on that on beaches and splash pads from council.
Thank you, Doug. Any other questions? So I think Doug's looking for some direction here on the splash pad. Go ahead, Councillor Bjorkman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in agreement with Councillor Vanderdolen with regard to the splash pads opening. I don't want to see the beach open without a splash pad, because that's when that gets taken over. The splash pads themselves, I think that the one in Essex Center, the one in Harrow, would be fine. You're going to get families, you're going to get locals that are there, but I would suggest that we fence the one in Colchester and put a staff there, because since they can't get to the beach, there's still lots of people coming down, and we've seen many times in the past, it's not just toddlers that use the splash pad down at the beach. So I would say that I would suggest that we have staff in Colchester, but I think Essex Center and Harrow Center will police themselves. That would be my opinion, and leave the beach closed, but open those splash.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really like Councillor Bjorkman's idea of separating the Essex splash pad and the Harrow splash pad away from the Colchester splash pad. I think the residents in our urban centers need some reprieve sooner rather than later. So I would vote to open the splash pads earlier, and I think we have to put the warning out there. If our residents do not social distance, we have to close them down. I think that the message has to be strong and clear. The signage, we need to alert park staff to, bylaw to drive around. And if we have any problems, we just close them down, turn the water off, right? It's as easy as turning the water off. I think I've heard from a lot of moms over the last, moms and dads over the last week or so, that they feel competent that if there's too many people there, they'll bring their kids away. But it's hot and our residents need some reprieve from that.
Thank you. Councillor Verbeek, you were next, and then Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think Councillor Bondi just hit on one of the points I was headed to. But yes, I would think that we do have to ask our bylaw enforcement to spend a little more time around those splash pads, because indeed I frequent all the splash pads with my grands, and it's not all just moms and tots. There are a large percentage are unaccompanied by adults. So with the idea that, yeah, we'll do the same thing as we did with the beaches, we'll have to shut it down if they aren't self-policing, if they aren't regulating and self-distancing and following the guidelines. But yeah, I would definitely ask that we do have more of a larger presence for the first while if we do open our splash pads by our bylaw enforcement officers.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman, go ahead.
Yes, I like the idea of opening the splash pads, and the idea of monitoring the one at Colchester made a lot of sense. I'm not sure you need somebody monitoring it on weekdays, but obviously on the weekend when it's extremely busy, it probably would warrant that. I don't know, it's difficult to put up fencing that can be opened up to allow people in normally, and then just restrict it for the weekends for somebody to monitor it. I'm not sure how that would work. Maybe Doug could have some feedback on that.
Go ahead, Doug, if you can.
Mr. Mayor, what a lot of them have done is snow fencing or other type of fencing around it. They have one large opening, kind of your right-hand side is you're in, your other side is you're out, and they have the staff in control, so they can see, you control how many are going in and out. So we could do that very easily. On the dates during the week as suggested, we just want to have a staff there and that gate would be open.
Good, thank you, Doug. Councillor Guerin, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so I'm in agreement with the suggestion of the Colchester one having some staffing, as long as it's on I'm assuming we're talking on a temporary basis until perhaps the beach is open. So I'm in agreement with that, and I think we can open them as soon as Doug and your department feels it's ready to go, and we hold off on the beach as we discussed.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman, did you have something further? I think I cut you off. Did you have anything further? Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I just, if we're all in favor of that, then I would say that I'd move that we open the splash pads with some restrictions on the one at Colchester Beach to be determined by the staffing, and that allows them to monitor it as they see fit.
Okay. Did you want to make that motion?
Yes, I would.
Okay, so you'll make that motion. You want to repeat the motion again, please?
That we open the splash pads as soon as possible in all three centers, with the caveat that the Colchester one be monitored as required, and whatever staffing is required to do that is negotiated by the staff.
And the beach stays closed.
And the beach stays
Correct?
closed.
Okay, good. Thank you. And a seconder was Councillor Vandendal. All in favor of that one there? All in favor? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Doug. Doug, you had something further? Go ahead.
Just before I do the last two really quick updates, but just so council's aware, we still need approval from the health unit, but we'll have them tomorrow or Wednesday. Talking with my staff in terms of fencing and getting a staff, we could have the one in Colchester up Friday for sure. So once we get the health unit approval, we'll get those up, and Friday would be the earliest because of staffing for the Colchester one.
Thank you, Doug. Good.
Two more, but I see Councillor Bondi has a question still.
Go ahead, Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are we clarifying when we're going to relook at our beach? Like, are we looking as to July 17th when we're hiring security? Are we just leaving the beach closed indefinitely? I'm just looking for clarification because I know our residents will want.
Go ahead, Doug.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, from what I've heard from council is we can go ahead in preparation with the security and parking enforcement to get the necessary paperwork and agreements in place, with the earliest date being July 17th, but we would come back to council for a date either then or keep moving it back.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Councillor Guerin, you had something? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
through you, Mr. Mayor. So I just wanted to make sure Doug has the right direction for, are we stopping that Colchester splash pad Monday through like the whole week, or are we, and is it gonna be 2 people on every time? I'm not sure if Doug got the right clarification there.
Go ahead, Councillor Bowman. Councillor Bowman,
I
go
think
ahead.
my motion said as required, so my initial idea was on the weekends, but if it's required more than that, then he'd have the option to go ahead and do it.
Okay, Councillor Guerin, is that good? Good. Okay, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Next on the agenda as 8.2. Oh, I'm sorry.
Doug.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Doug.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just be real quick. The last, just so council's up to date, day camp and indoor pool started today. So we had 7 kids for our day camp for this first week. We have 5 aquafit classes that were offered. We had 9 participants registered in each one of those sessions. We had 5 length swims offered and 4 participants in each session. So actually pretty good numbers for our first day. Last update is temporary patio applications. So since our last time, in total now we have 10 applications to date. 9 are restaurants and 1 is retail. 6 are in Essex Center, 1 Harrow, 2 Colchester, and 1 in Ward 2. 6 of those are on public property. 9 have already been approved, and we're just waiting for 1 to have a site meeting. I just want to do a quick update so council's aware of that as well.
Thank you, Doug. Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, I'm going to bring it back to the beach one more time. If we're going through and we have a quote from security to start on the 17th, I would like to see the beach open on the 17th unless we move back into phase 1. Like, we only have so many weekends in the summer. And if we have enforcement, parking enforcement and security on the beach, that is going to solve our problems. Like, our people want to get out. So I just want to go on the record saying that if we've lined up security for the 17th, we could be open on the 18th.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Doug, for the report. Appreciate it.
8.2, Infrastructure Services 2020-06. That said report be received and that council adopts the Transportation Association of Canada's guidelines for establishing posted speed limits, and further, that council adopts Infrastructure Services policy on establishing speed limits on Town of Essex roads.
Have a mover on this report, please. Councillor Bjorkman and Deputy Mayor Malage, any questions? You got a question, Councillor Benendole? No? All in favor? You had a question, Deputy Mayor?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
To our Director of Infrastructure, Kevin Gerard. So to initiate, I take it to initiate some kind of review. Is it like a resident can come forward and request, or is it like it has to be a petition, so many people? Can a councillor request a drop in the speed limit or an increase in the speed limit? Can you just give us an indication on that, what you're looking for?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor. The way that I drafted the policy that I presented in front of you today is that it would be through petition process. So essentially how I would see this going is that if a single resident wanted to initiate the town looking at assessing the speed limit within a road, they would determine the section of road, they would and present it to to myself, they would circulate a petition to those people that live in that segment, and the petition would require a majority of 65% or greater in order to initiate the town conducting the actual survey of the road. If a counselor were to make the request, I would recommend still having that particular resident that made the request to you go through that policy. The policy is intended so that it will provide us with a standard process that's consistent throughout the entire municipality. So we're like really driving home having this reliable tool that we use consistently all the time. So I would like to see every single request for speed limit reduction or increase go through this policy.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Councillor Guerin.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Kevin. 4.03, bullet 3, any part of the road length requested has not been evaluated in the last 5 years. That's something that would not be reviewable. When would the clock start on that? Like on that 5 years? Is it from the time that this gets approved, or is it 5 years like from today back?
No, the way it would work is essentially what the policy is intended to do is ensure that we're not duplicating efforts of the town. We get a lot of complaints that were like related to speed, and having to review these consistently and throughout the year poses a staff resourcing issue. So what the intention of that clause is to ensure that we've gone through the petition process, a resident has circulated it. If it was deemed unsuccessful, that we wouldn't be continually trying a new way to evaluate this road, so that we're not limiting staff resources. So essentially, it would end at the termination of the policy, or of the termination of the policy. So at the point in which it becomes ineligible is and written notice was provided to that resident who made the petition, is when the clock would start.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking is if this is a revised policy or newer policy, we're setting these guidelines and standards moving forward. So I'm wondering if the clock is starting now, or if somebody comes in with a petition for a reduced speed limit, for example, and that road was looked at, say, 3 years ago by administration, would that not qualify, or would the clock start like now?
Yeah, it would no longer qualify, right? If it was in the 5-year term, then it would no longer qualify. It could be requested again after the 5 years, though. So we would conduct another review after 5 years if that resident or another resident wanted to initiate another petition.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vanendon, you were next.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, first of all, Mr. Gerard, this is a very good report, very complete and efficient and to the point. I enjoyed reading it. This is one of the hottest issues that I get as a councillor, and I thought for a while that it was mainly people who were anti-speeding, but lately I've been getting calls from the other side from people who are ferociously opposed to lowering speed limits on the back rural roads, because they say it's impossible to get around. They just can't get they can't function properly in their lives if they have to be driving around at a crawl for 10 kilometers to Harrow and 10 kilometers back. So, the people are split on both sides on this. My question is, this 65% of residents on a defined stretch have to be in agreement. I thought that already existed. Was that a new number, a new rule? Because I thought we already had that rule.
65%, through you, Mr. Mayor, 65% is consistent with the Drainage Act. It's also consistent with local improvement policy. It's just a way to ensure that, some policies may state 50%, but the rationale behind 2/3 is that you're not splitting a neighborhood. Or you're not splitting, you're not causing as much conflict with residents. So if 50% of the residents wanted a speed limit change and 50% didn't, we have a division in a neighborhood and we want to avoid that conflict. So 2/3 would represent a good majority. And like I said, it's consistent with many other policies and acts.
Thank you. Just a clarification. I don't disagree at all with the number 65%. My question was, what is the rule now?
There really is no rule. So basically these speed limit requests are handled on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes they're handled through direct contact with the resident by council motion. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here with this policy, is to provide a tool for both council, all the residents, and administration to all be on the same page, follow the same consistent process, and ensure that we have an objective way to actually look at all of these roads, rather than, you know, making decisions just based on resident complaints.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Bondi, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Gerard, for this, for your work on this. This came really fast. You did a great job with this. So I think one of the things, the common themes that keep coming up is a speeding enforcement, right? You know, when you drive into LaSalle, people don't speed. Why don't you speed? Because you get tickets. So it follows along with the number of complaints that we have, I believe, in enforcement. So another thing I want to touch on, reduce workload and duplication for town staff. I want to add in there, and council, because if we have a policy, like I've spent a lot of time on speeding complaints too. So if we have a policy, hopefully I can just say, hey, residents, here's the policy, here's what you need to do, get your 65%. So hopefully it'll reduce counselors' workload as well. So one of the things that I would like us to continue on, and I'm not sure, I believe it'll be in your files there, Kevin, to take over from our CAO before, is the speed limits around schools. I believe we need to focus on those, the speed limits, reducing them around schools and having the safety zones there. I've felt very passionately about that for a while. I do believe Essex Center has school safety zones, but the school in Harrow does not. I believe Councillor Verbeek has been struggling with the school in her ward. So that's one thing that we still need to address. So public education, reminding people of their responsibility. And just through administrative opinion, I bring a lot of complaints forward about the third concession. Is it your opinion that I want to know why it's increased, because it's definitely increased. Is it increased because the fourth concession, the speed limit on the fourth concession is reduced? Can we review that, the speed limit on the fourth? I mean, I don't know if we want to touch it or not, but it seems like it's pushed traffic south onto the third concession. So, and when we change the limit on the fourth, does that mean it was evaluated, or do we have any roads that have been recently evaluated? That's my one.
Okay, I'll try to address that. So through you, Mr. Mayor, I can't really comment on a speed increase, or sorry, not a speed increase, but a volume increase on the third concession. I know that there was a little bit of construction that happened, which could skew some of the volume on the road. But it's hard to say if that was a direct result from speed. There's no way to effectively measure that. But again, through this policy, the intent is to look at all of the conditions of that road. The way that we've evaluated speed in the past has been with the TAC manual. So we use the TAC manual, which is recommended here today. The big thing is just setting a process and also setting evaluation criteria that will be a little bit more consistent. So I can't really speak to the volume increase and if there has been one.
Okay, further to that, could we use that TAC method to look at the fourth concession to see if the speed limit there is suitable, especially after it gets redone? People are going to want to go 80. Like we make the speed limit 60, so people go 80, where really the speed limit should be 80 and people go 80, which we know doesn't happen, but I don't know. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you, Kevin, for the report. Any motion to receive the report?
There is a motion.
Oh, there is a motion. Who made the motion?
Councillor Bjorkman, seconded by the
Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 8.3 on the agenda, Infrastructure Services 2020-07, re vulnerable children and children at play signage requests. That said report be received, that council authorizes the Infrastructure Services Department to no longer install said signage, and that council authorizes the removal of the existing vulnerable children and children at play signs when the existing signs fall into disrepair or when the child it serves reaches the age of majority or moves from the area, whichever comes first.
On the report, need a motion? Need a motion on the report, please. Councillor Bondi and Councillor Bjorkman, any questions? Deputy Mayor Malash, go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. I'm going to be opposed to this motion to remove signs. I believe that there is a value in having these signs up. I know that myself personally, as I drive through neighborhoods or if I drive through my own community here in where I live, when I notice those signs, I am more aware of the likelihood that there'd be a child in the neighborhood that cannot understand or visually see or visually hear the commotion of a vehicle. And that child may be there by accident, not necessarily because they should be there, but maybe because they have accidentally gotten into that position. And I think it just heightens the awareness of the motor vehicle drivers that there's potential, and just keep an eye open for something like this. Now, fortunately, the ones in my neighborhood, I've never had an incident. I've never heard of anybody having an incident, but it may be due to the fact that there are signs there. I think there's an easy way, an easy fix to try and get around this. That's not a lot of work for administration. And I'm willing to suggest a report that would help track, the signs going forward. And I'd even be willing to go through the entire town of Essex with the ones that we have right now and try and figure out whether they still need to be in place, if that's the concern. So, and I'm sure that there are other councillors that would be willing to help me out with that. So, Mr. Mayor, I am not in favor of just banning this program. I think there is value to it. And I do understand not putting a lot of signs up that it desensitizes the drivers. And I think that's the reason why perhaps we should be looking at the ones that are in existence right now to see whether they're helping or giving any value. And that should be our starting point. And but I do believe these signs are of value, and particularly to those parents who have vulnerable children. So I'll leave it there and I'll listen to what other people have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Bondi, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can breathe a sigh of relief after our Deputy Mayor Ledwood had such a strong lead. If signs are not the solution, we have to think of something else that is the solution. We cannot remove a protected layer with substituting it with something better. And I don't know what that looks like, traffic calming, enforcement, but this, the agenda came out Thursday, big agenda. And I did post this on Facebook, and there is a lot of feedback out there. There are a lot of people going, the last line in the report that says, there's going to be a cost savings. People are like, oh my gosh, this is not the cost savings to be had in our municipality. People did say, when I see that sign, I do slow down. Maybe not everybody does. Maybe not everybody recognizes it, but there are still people that say that. So at this point, and I think I've heard from parents of children that have autism saying, they believe it's a human rights issue and their family relies on it. I do agree we have to tie it somehow to individuals. I believe the town of Kingsville ties it to a roll number. One of the Kingsville councillors posted on my Facebook that they tie it to a roll number. So maybe our model is just needs updating. So I will hop in there with you, Deputy Mayor, and start counting these signs too. And I think we need to push forward and keep doing what we're doing. We've been requesting these signs for a long time. I have anyways, and we haven't been able to get them for a while. And now I know why. At least we have an answer why, but I think the community still wants to see them. Thank you.
Councillor Verbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I had my power flash, so I'm sorry that I missed Councillor Bondi's remarks, but I caught the end. And it sounds like she was similar minded to our deputy mayor. And I read this agenda and I thought I was not going to be of a popular opinion. And I'm really grateful to be in agreement with the first two councillors that spoke. I can't support this as it is. I actually, as a parent of a special needs child, some of the pros towards disbanding this program were that parents would become less vigilant and rely on the signs to protect their children and keep them safe. And I just think that isn't even in any way possibly a reality. I too have had deaf children in this neighborhood on one of the concessions near me for years, and I know that the kids are grown and gone now, but I still let off the gas when I'm coming to that area because of that sign. So yeah, I would also, if it came down to us, Deputy Mayor Malash, I would count all the signs and help do an accounting in my ward. I won't support disbanding this program.
Thank you. I'm in agreement too with not supporting it. Councillor Bjorkman, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the rest of the team. We're looking for a motion to get this moving, and my motion is simply to receive the report, but not to support the change in the signs. I don't agree with losing that signage. I have friends that have benefited from it, and I think, yeah, maybe we need to find a better way. And I did see that post on Councillor Bondi's wall about how they follow that with roll numbers and that they're followed up on, so you know where the sign is, who has it, what family it's associated with. So there's ways for us to track that, but so my motion is to simply accept this report, but not to act on it.
Thank you, Councillor. Kevin, you had something to say before we get a seconder. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if I can just provide a little bit of context here, the report was drafted using a lot of evidence and studies that have been completed, right? So this is not necessarily my personal opinion, but it's also research based on the regional level, the provincial level, all over Canada and even the United States. So ultimately, we will move in whatever direction that council wants to move. If you want to continue to put these signs up, we will ultimately do that, no problem. My recommendation, and it's found in your report, is I did include some criteria that's required that certain municipalities, including Kingsville, have a policy. Their policy is essentially to have residents who are requesting these signs, particularly the vulnerable children signs, fill out an application to the town requesting the sign, what they would like the sign to be. They are required to provide a physician's statement of the disability of the child. The application is good for 5 years, so they would have to renew their application every 5 years. They also have a requirement to keep the town updated on their child's disability, if they have any improvements, that type of thing. And they also have a requirement from the town to sign a liability waiver. And the big reasoning for the liability waiver is that because of some of the facts that I presented in the report about the false sense of security, that type of stuff, the potential legal exposure to the town, most townships and public agencies have implemented a liability waiver, making sure that the town is not responsible for the safety of their child, and that these signs don't necessarily protect their child from vehicular traffic. So my recommendation for the motion is to maybe come back with a policy that states those criteria, if that's the direction in which council wants to go, and have an application process and policy for residents to follow. And we can work in the background at how to track that. It doesn't, coming from the town of Kingsville, it doesn't work exactly the same in Kingsville as it does in Essex. So there are some logistical things that we will have to do as a town to try and figure out a proper way to track this. But I'm not saying that it can't be done. So that would be my recommendation, and I'll leave it to council to decide.
Councillor Bondi, I think you made the motion, didn't you? Councillor, no, who made an invite? Oh, Councillor Bjorkman, did you want to go along with that recommendation?
Yeah, actually, I would amend my motion to follow that direction, the ultimate direction that the director just gave us.
Yeah, I think that's a great
So
recommendation.
is that one of the yeah, is that one of the options?
Can't hear you, Councillor.
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah, it wasn't.
you, Mr. Mayor, it's on page 4 of my report.
Yeah, so I just said it wasn't one of our options on the agenda. The two that were there. So yes, I would actually withdraw my original motion if my seconder is good with that, and make the motion that we follow that that reference. I don't know how to state that, but I don't know if we can help me with just how that wording would go, that we look to enhance our sign policy based on a recommendation from Director Gerard.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin, if you would want to add to that, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that maybe the best way to proceed with the motion is to authorize the Director of Infrastructure Services to draft a petition for council's approval.
Policy.
Or sorry, not a petition, a policy for council's approval with the criteria stated within the report.
I'll second that.
Good. Who was the seconder? It was Councillor Vandendolen was the seconder. Okay. No?
No, it was not the seconder.
Who was the seconder?
The original one was just withdrawn.
Okay.
The seconder was Councillor Bonnie, but we have a new motion.
Okay, so under a new motion, did you want to second it, Councillor Vandendolen? Okay, you had discussion.
No, I have something to say. I have something to say.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Through you. Like Councillor Verbeek, I missed several minutes of this debate because we had another power outage here in Pleasant Valley on the Arner. It was a Hydro 1 failure. We get dozens and dozens of them a year. So forgive me if I missed part of this, but I have to thank Mr. Gerard, who's the newest hire in our senior ranks, for another excellent report. I thought this is a very clear-eyed, science-based report with actual evidence from the real world about what works and what doesn't work. I thought it was terrific. I'm in favor of scrapping these signs. One of my neighbors reminded me today that there's been one here just down the road from my house for the last 21 years we've lived here, and I didn't even remember. I don't see it anymore. And if those signs worked, the transport trucks wouldn't be doing 110 kilometers an hour down the Arner town line, as they do every hour of every day. So I will probably end up being alone voting against retention of these signs and the proliferation of these unnecessary signs which don't work, which cost a lot of money. It's not common sense to use them. It's a waste of public money. So I won't be supporting it. But thanks for the report. It was very good.
Thank you, Councillor. So, Councillor Guerin.
Yeah, okay, just on that, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the motion that's on the floor is good. We need administration to just basically come back. If it's not going to be the signs, then it's got to be something else. We just can't take the signs away and assume that they're not working. Yes, I lived in Essex Center here. I had to drive around today and look for a lot of these signs. And I reminded myself, well, yeah, they are there. You do get used to seeing them. But new people coming into town, maybe they do pay more attention. Maybe other people that live in the neighborhoods, maybe they pay more attention than I do even. So as long as administration come back with something If it's not going to be signed, something else we can do. The way it's being done right now on a has you ask basis is quite cumbersome, I'm sure, to handle. We'll be back to here every time trying to approve them. But I think they do have some merit. I was standing today at the new crosswalk at Hanlon. It's an existing crosswalk. They just put a new sign up, and I had to wait for 2 cars to blow by me before I could cross. So those signs do give us a self sense of security, you know. So I don't feel comfortable for sure removing them and replacing them with nothing. So I hope administration come back with something that we can all agree on that will work for us.
Thank you, Councillor. So we had Councillor Bjorkman made the motion. We didn't have a seconder on the motion. I need a seconder, Councillor Bowman. Any further discussion on this? All in favor of the motion? It's carried. Thanks a lot, Kevin. I know it's a lot of work on that report and a lot of discussion on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 8.4, Drainage Report 2020-05, adoption of Section 77, subsection 3, engineer letter of opinion with respect to the Richmond Drain Bank repairs. And this is together with authorizing bylaw 1928, that said report be received and supported, and that bylaw 1928 received 3 readings this evening.
We need a mover, please, to receive Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Bowman. Any questions? All in favor? Okay, thank you.
8.5 on the agenda is Community Services 2020-03, life lease of Kingsman Fieldhouse. And this is together with authorizing bylaw 1927, that said report be received, that council approves entering into an agreement with Learning and Friendship and Quality for lease space at the Kinsman Fieldhouse located at 50 Fairview for a 1-year term with an option to renew for an additional 2 years beginning August 1st, beginning on the first day of August 2020. And that bylaw 1927 to authorize that lease agreement received 3 readings accordingly this evening.
Good, thank you. That's glad to see somebody's taking that over. Are you moving it, Councillor Verbeek? And Councillor Bjorkman second. Any questions? Deputy Mayor Malash, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Through to Mr. Sweet. It's not a group, Life is not a group that I've heard a lot about. Have they been around in the Essex area, and is it an Essex-driven organization? And the other thing is what are we leasing? What dollar amount are we talking about here? We're leasing it to them for?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's actually a new organization with an individual who's worked in this field throughout the years, and they've been working with the Small Business Bureau to develop this business to use that space. As in the report, it's an annual revenue of $54.24 or a monthly rate of $452.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Verbeek, did you have something? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just, the reason I fully support this is, for starters, it's great to see the field house being used. It's, you know, a little revenue generated versus no revenue in an empty building. But I'm also really grateful for the organization of this group, and I'm really glad that they're going to be operating in our community, and I'm glad for people that take this kind of initiative with these vulnerable citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vanendon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Sweet, I'm just curious, what sector was the private, you said you had one private sector sort of business that wanted to go in there. What sector were they from?
Mr. Mayor, a driving school.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Guerin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I looked on the website, I couldn't find them, and I don't think they have a website yet, Doug, but do you know how this organization's funded? And second question is, with that field house, I'm not sure when the last time it's been painted, the exterior. Is there any way we can, or have they expressed any interest in perhaps painting the outside of the building to kind of match their brand?
Mr. Mayor, Field House was actually painted last year. We did meet with the proponent on site because from the previous user, there had to be some work that had to be done. It had shorter toilets. We replaced those, some of the tile, we patched inside. Other than that, they were good with as is right now because they want to make it kind of their home base. So any renovations they asked, we did those in advance. Even if they didn't come in, we would have to do those renovations anyways.
Okay, thank you.
Funding?
Oh, sorry, to Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure where their funding comes from, but I do know, like I said, they've been working with the Small Business Bureau for the business plan and everything. So they've been partnering with them.
Okay. Nobody else? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
8.6 this evening is Economic Development 2020-07, Essex Tourism Events Fund application. That said report be received and that council approves the distribution of $1,000 of funding to the Rotary Club of Harrow.
Need a mover, please, on this. Councillor Bowman and Councillor Bjorkman. Any questions? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
8.7 Strategic Communications Report 2020-03, Community Policing Survey Results. Said report being presented to council this evening for information purposes.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, I need a mover on the report. Okay, Councillor Verbeek and seconder Deputy Mayor Malash. Questions? Councillor Verbeek.
Alex is going to present the report.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, go ahead, Alex.
All right, thank you. Good
Hold on,
evening.
Councillor Verbeek, let him do the report first. Go ahead.
Yeah, just gonna, through the chair, just gonna do a quick summary of the report, kind of explain some of my methodology. Start with some context. The survey was created by administration.
Sorry, just a point of order. Today, when Alex sent out the email, he said we could table it to discuss it until we get all of the results, which Councillor Verbeek, the chair of the Police Service Board, may have wanted to do that. So I don't know, Councillor Verbeek, if that's what you wanted to do.
Go ahead, Councillor Verbeek.
Yes, well, thanks for that, Councillor Bondi. That's why I was waving in the screen. That option was offered to me, and I was definitely, that was my intent, that we do postpone until we can at least receive, until we can receive the surveys. It would just be, how would we be able to, I mean, we'll receive this, okay? But this is a summary, as Alex was saying, this is a summary of the surveys as interpreted by staff. And so yes, I would ask that we defer or postpone receiving the summary until after council can read and digest and review. And then at that point, we can receive the report, the summary. We can, we'll have all the information in front of us, and then we can discuss, you know, steps moving forward. We'll be able to take all the information to move that we gained from the surveys and move forward. So yeah, that would be my request, that we receive the summary of them after we've had time to review them.
So you're saying, Councillor, you want to table it?
Absolutely.
Okay. I need a seconder for that. Councillor Bondi, you had something to say, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know, Rob, OJ, I don't know now that it's been seconded if procedurally I can speak to this right now or
no, I don't think.
I believe I believe it's just a vote at this point. There's usually no speaking on this type of motion. And it suspends the main motion.
Yeah.
So sorry, I couldn't hear you, Rob. Was that a no?
That's a no, yeah. You should, once you get a seconder, it's just a matter of a vote. There's usually no debate on the merits of the motion to table.
All in favor of tabling it? Opposed? Opposed?
Can you pull them again?
Go ahead. We're gonna, Rob, we're gonna poll again. All in favor of tabling it? Yep. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Opposed? I'm gonna oppose.
Motion fails.
Motion fails. So he can speak on it.
So we still have the main motion.
Yeah, we have the main motion still. And we didn't have a seconder on the main.
We did, Mr. Mayor. It was originally moved by Councillor Verbeek, seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
So Chris still can't speak on it.
It's the main motion is back on the table.
Yeah,
so
the main motion's back on.
speak to that.
Yeah, Chris can speak to it now. Go ahead, Chris.
No, well, that's, yeah, I was just, I guess, to speak on the request a little further, and that's something I'd like Alex to go through the report, and he's going to speak. We've talked quite a bit on depth in terms of the overall data, and, you know, really the end of the day, administration, you know, took the overall data, which was a ton of data, which is what we do, and provided in, you're right, Councillor Verbeek, in a summary form, very transparent, and, you know, no punches pulled. It's all there for you. I would have to confirm with legal in terms of when we put in a survey that's anonymous, what type of data can be released even to council and what premise that falls under. So it's in this type of survey where anonymity was, you know, professed in the survey, I would just want to make sure that all our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed. So I think at this point, it's let Alex run through the report and speak to some of those additional concerns that were brought up today by council.
Thank you, Chris. I just have one question to Alex before he goes. When did the survey actually go out? When was the date?
The survey ran throughout May. I don't have the exact date.
Okay, so it went out in May.
Mm-hmm.
So we got May, June. So they had
I believe it closed early June.
Okay, so we had a lot of time for it to come back then. So you're talking May and June. Okay, so there was plenty of time for the public to respond to the survey. So, okay.
June 12th, it closed.
Okay, so June or May and half of June.
Okay, so a month and a half, pretty well. A month and a half for the public to respond to the survey. I really think it was enough time. I don't know how much more time you needed. You know, you're talking a month and a half. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I may, through the chair, I don't know, I don't think the issue is the length of time. As I noted in the report, we had good feedback. We had 308 responses. Just going to give you some context. The survey was created by administration, by me, with feedback from council and the chief administrative officer. The design of the survey really aligns with previous surveys, most notably the one conducted by the OPP in 2017. The design was also informed by best practices identified by surveys in other municipalities in Canada, notably London, Ontario, and Victoria, BC, as well as some more academic research which focuses on community policing. Like I said, the survey garnered a significant amount of response in 3 broad categories, which were further broken down into 3 to 5 sub-questions per category. As the report notes, the survey was designed to produce both quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative data is data that can be assigned a number and analyzed accordingly. And then this data can also be useful to be compared to other data from other surveys, for example. Qualitative data is more open-ended. This was the comment section. So it's a more open-ended comment. What are your thoughts on this, or do you have additional comments? So it provides more of an open-ended area for respondents. The 300 responses were distributed by sex, ward, age, and length of residency, as noted in on page 3 of the report. And to produce a summary, I took a twofold approach. For the quantitative information, I assigned numerical values to the scales presented in the survey. So for example, On the satisfaction scales, the scale would be very dissatisfied, which would score a 1, and very satisfied, which would score 5. So that allowed me to assign numbers to each answer, and then I could respond. I could analyze that data by providing the averages and the graphs to show how the responses were distributed, which you can see throughout the report. For the qualitative portion, I read all the comments provided by respondents under each category, and then I identified common themes. It's a process called content analysis. The themes were then noted and were noted to be either negative, positive, or neutral. So we had a lot of overlap. Basically, visibility, as I'll talk about, was a common theme. There, people were talking about issues. I never see the police, or the police don't. I don't often see them. So that was a large notable theme, as an example of part of content analysis. So the results, I would say they're mixed results. Overall satisfaction garnered an average of 3.5 out of 5, with slightly more respondents indicating satisfaction or over dissatisfaction. That's either satisfied or very satisfied, and very dissatisfied or dissatisfied. Visibility again emerged as a significant data point, with a majority indicating dissatisfaction. For information sharing and working with the community showed relatively even distribution of responses, with a large portion of neutral responses. The neutral response is really just people might not have thoughts one way or another, and those two questions showed that maybe there's not a common idea of how good the police are one way or another. I also noted a number of themes in this portion of the survey, which were identified in the comment section. Visibility, again, police emerged as a notable issue for responses, garnering 58 negative comments. Again, these are just highlights that I pulled out as particularly interesting data points or notable data points. For respondents who had interactions with the police, to note for council, this only asked if somebody had an interaction with police over the last year, they would answer these questions. So it excluded anyone who hasn't had interactions with the police. A majority of these respondents indicated that they were satisfied or very satisfied on all 3 sub-questions. And most of the comments from this section were related to the quality of the service provided. So whether they had a good experience or bad experience, there were 19 negative comments and 13 positive comments. The third section provided respondents opportunity to give their feedback on crime rates and perceptions of safety. I found this a little bit interesting as a researcher. Notably, a majority of respondents noted feeling safe or very safe in the town of Essex, even though a majority also felt crime has either increased or increased greatly. A small minority thought that there was a decrease in crime. Thematically, many comments expanded on the themes of crime and safety identified in the quantitative analysis. Quantitative questions and visibility again arose as a notable theme, with all 29 comments being negative. Last but not least, the final section gave respondents the opportunity to provide additional comments. This was, we received 28 additional comments. They were grouped into 4 themes, which again included visibility. And I'd say read the report for the other comments or themes of comments. To conclude, I think to reiterate, there's a voluntary online only survey can't necessarily be reliable to be understood as an accurate reflection of the community. I think council understands that, especially with COVID-19, it was only online. Typically, we would provide an opportunity for respondents to pick up a survey at one of our facilities and do it as a paper copy, and that kind of expands the opportunity for participants to participate. So I would note that as particularly problematic for this survey, any really future surveys that we conduct. And the intent of the report, again, was to provide a summary of results in a format that was digestible and easy to understand for council and the members of the public. The use of the analysis is pretty common based on my experience and background, and it's I believe it to be an accurate presentation of the comments that were submitted, but I understand council would like to see the raw data, and I'm more than happy to provide that, after I receive some advice from the town solicitor. So I have, like I said, and like Chris covered, the survey did say that the responses would be anonymous. So prior to providing the raw data, I would have to go through the comments just to make sure there's no identifying information. Some people For example, they said, I live on this street and I never see police. We'd want to remove that information just to be sure that response can't be tracked back to them. So that's something that I would have to do. And like I noted in the emails today, I'd be more than happy. So that's pretty much all I have for the summary and kind of an explanation of the methodology. I'm more than happy to answer any questions now or in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Verbeek.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Alex. I first want to start by being very clear. I am not questioning your survey. I thought it was great. I was happy with the length of time that it was out available to the public to use. You and I met about this, and then once it was put together, you were able to share with me and comment. I was very pleased with the survey. I was also very pleased when I got the report with the way it was laid out. It was easy for us to digest and easy for us to share with the public. My concern is not with the survey or, as you say, the interpretation to present the information for us to easily follow. My concern is that before we have a wholesome discussion on the survey, to do what it was, what it was designed for, and that's to look at ways we can take this information from the community and move forward. And if changes are required, if we need to have discussions with the OPP where there are some problem areas, clearly the visibility came up on even in your general comments, and it hit very high dissatisfaction. But and when we look at 19 negative comments about past interactions with the police. Well, unless we're looking at those surveys, we can't really wrap our head around, well, was that a negative interaction with the police because you got pulled over and got a ticket, or because you were caught doing something you shouldn't? Or was it because you called for assistance and you were not satisfied with the results of that call? So for us to have a real discussion and move forward and take this survey and use it the way it was designed to use, it'll be after it would have to take place after Friday when we're able to review the surveys in full. But thank you again. I think your work on this, Alex, was terrific, and I much appreciate working with me, and the whole final result, it was very pleasing to the eye and easy to present. But again, we would need the full surveys before we can digest it and look at how we're going to move forward with the new information. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from council? Go ahead, Councillor Guerin.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Alex, for the report. Just a couple notes on there. I did see 36% dissatisfaction with the police service. Some strong comments or points on the misconception, I think, of increased crime and the community not being safe. I'll refer to the 2019 November Maclean's magazine, where Essex was the #6 safest community in all of Canada. LaSalle was #1, and outside of LaSalle, we were next at 6. So I think that's saying a lot for our police. I would like to see more visibility of them in our community. I think everyone would agree on that. And I'd also like to see more enforcement on some of our things, such as speeding and some of the stuff we were talking about earlier tonight. But I think overall the OPP is doing a pretty good job. I don't think the survey is accurate is overly accurate in all aspects of it, but it gives us a good idea of where we stand. Thank you again.
Thank you. Chris, you had a comment? Go ahead.
Through your worship, yeah, I think just to echo some of council's and Alex's comments, definitely, with this type of survey, you get, when it's a volunteer survey, as Alex noted, you get typically the ends of the spectrum, right? You get people that are either very happy or not very happy, because they're the ones who are willing to volunteer and take their time to fill out a survey. And so I think as long as we're aware of that when we're moving forward with this, in terms of utilizing this to mold, how we want our level of service, I think we just have to be aware of that. I can say I've already forwarded this report to both the staff sergeant and the inspector and set up a meeting this week to discuss those very things that council's talking tonight in terms of, those perceptions on visibility and some of the things that have come up with this report. So, I'm already pushing them to, they're aware of it. You guys, this is what the residents are saying, albeit a volunteer survey. So we need to have a discussion that way. So just to let council know as far as some movement on this end.
Thank you, Chris. Just further to that, you're going to meet in person with them or over the phone?
Working through it right now, trying to schedule that up. I don't know.
Well, I would like to be in that meeting because I have some concerns myself. If I can, I'd like to attend that meeting. I like to have Mr. Miller here, Inspector Miller, and I like to have the sergeant here too, because I do have some concerns on coverage. Visibility.
Well, I think through this, your worship, I mean, if council wants to bring them back to council and have them in front of all of council to discuss this very well. My meeting was more of a, here's the survey, let's get this going. I'm not going to be making decisions on behalf of council. It was just to inform them and have the discussion, and then to bring them back to council, and then council can have a full-on discussion, with them and their level of service or what council wants to see.
Yeah, I think that would be a great idea. I would like for them to come back in front of council, because I'm sure some of the councilors here tonight have some concerns. So, anybody else? Go ahead, Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too would like to see the police board chair involved in any decisions, in any meetings. I'm actually a little taken aback that she wasn't brought in sooner with the survey results and shown the comments. This is the chair of the police services board, and the police service board actually, I believe, should have called a meeting to see the results too, because police service board members in the community are seeing some of the results on my Facebook. And I do know it's council survey and council contracts them out, but I believe we have to acknowledge that we have a police service board that is responsible for governance over this contracted service. The survey is a starting point. I don't know if anybody has access to the survey conducted by the OPP in 2017. I don't know if our director of communications has that. I did hear about that before, but it'd be nice to put that in our file too, so we can say 17, 20. I really would like to see the ward information as well, because as a counselor in Harrow, I have received a lot of complaints about the police, and I want to see if those complaints line up to some of the qualitative comments. We can't make everybody happy, and I do agree that this isn't a fantastic representative sample, but can we make some of those unhappier people through governance and direction less unhappy and more happy, right? We want that contracted service, but we still want, I've said it before, we still want the community policing feel, right? And I do believe there is, we can turn it around. So if we're looking at terminating the staff sergeant, which we've discussed, can we look at having another police officer on the streets? Visibility is a common theme. I believe tonight we kind of had a half digested meal, because even though some counselors might not read all the comments, I'm one of the counselors that I'm going to read all the comments. I want a solid understanding with this, because I want to be able to make progress and I want to move forward and show improvements. This is not a satisfactory survey result, in my opinion. We may not ever have a 5 out of 5, but we can move up that scale. So I'm interested in seeing the rest and then having that conversation. We hear that the EMS are showing up first, right? More often than not than our OPP. So those are all things that I think this is definitely not a concluding meeting. We need to have a meeting, as soon as we can, with all of the information in the data. If I went to residents and I said, council didn't see the comments, the residents would be like, well, we want you to see the comments. We provided the comments to you in the media release sent out by the town of Essex. The chair of the police service board was quoted saying that the comments will help council make decisions. So it's very important that we see them, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to add to that, it's very puzzling that the OPP cannot give us a number of how many officers are on duty at a time. To me, I don't know why they can't release that information to us as a town. How many officers do we have? We pay a lot of money for policing. I like to know how many officers are on duty. Go ahead, Councillor Bjorkman.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Alex, thank you very much for the report. Thanks for putting the survey together. They were great questions. We've all agreed that you asked well-formed questions that led people to really voice their opinion. I think a lot of what we're seeing here shows the value of the directed survey that I believe Tecumseh did earlier, that I think it was Councillor Bondi that brought that to our attention. And we kind of balked at the price of what that would cost. But I think this is showing us that, you know what, we may need to determine a schedule. Do we need to do this every 4 years? Like as a new council comes in year 2 of each council, do we do a survey that's done by professionals so that we do get that all around response? I agree with a lot of these. We get the two ends of the spectrum that mainly will partake in it. It's really good value. We need this to evaluate what we're doing with our police service, how we decide to move forward with the police service. So I just think that there's a good direction as opposed to just doing a voluntary survey like this. However, this survey has given us lots of information. This is the receiving night. I voted in favor of listening to the report tonight and accepting the report so that we can share what's in the report right now. This is our first step with the report, and it's important that our residents see us talking about it. And yes, we'll get the rest of it and we can revisit it. But it was important tonight to have this presented and talk about it. So thank you for the work you've done. But I do think it really points us in the direction that we need to go with a professional survey on a part of our budget that takes up a huge percentage. It's worth that value to go out and do it the right way. Thanks.
Councillor Vanendone, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, yes, Alex, thanks for a great report. It was very well done. I like the way you presented it. It was very clear. But we have to take, I take this anyway with a large grain of salt. You know, I mean, the tip off to that is when such a large number of people think that crime has increased a lot. I mean, that's just so obviously and laughably wrong that you have to wonder what about the rest of their responses. I've had some personal interactions with the OPP over the past year, and they've all been excellent. But like some of those respondents, I too wonder, you know, where the heck are they sometimes? That visibility is an issue. But I don't know how much we can base on this report, no matter what the actual raw data says or the unmanipulated stuff. And I question the councillors who were so anxious to get their hands on that stuff. I mean, you've got to know the governance rules don't allow the chairperson of one body a sneak peek at report that's being prepared by another body. Like that's not the way things work. I wonder what they're drilling down for. Are you trying to look for comments that support your preconceived notions? I don't get it. But anyway, I was glad to hear this tonight, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Darren, you haven't spoke yet. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have spoken, but I'm going to speak again, I guess. I just want to actually, on your point about what we pay for, how many we get, I sent an email out to council back on June 22nd, I believe. It was an article from the Essex Free Press. It was our Essex police at the time. It was setting up for amalgamation, and they went right into details of telling us they were going to be breaking Essex into 3 zones. They were going to be staffing it with 5 officers in each zone at all times. Total of 18 constables, 3 sergeants, a staff member, a chief, a deputy chief, 6 constables needed to each zone to allow for 5-day work weeks. those are the type of details I don't understand why we can't get from our OPP. And I think it's the same frustrations that we're seeing in Leamington as well. We just want to know how many do we have out there working for us, and what are we paying for? And I don't think that's too much to ask for what we pay them. So I'm 100% on board with your comment as to where that information is and why they won't share it.
Thank you, Councillor. I agree 100% with what you're saying. We should know what the number of officers are on duty at one time. You wouldn't believe the information I got from officers. You wouldn't believe it. Coverage on the weekend, 2. I'm very concerned when we have 2 officers on duty on a weekend. Very concerned. So, Deputy Mayor Malash, you're next.
Thank you, through your worship. And I too asked those questions. And when we first switched from community policing to contract policing, that was one of the biggest questions that myself and Councillor Vokes at the time had. Neither one of us supported going to OPP contracting, but ultimately we did go to police contracting. But that was one of the biggest concerns. I wanted people to realize that those two kind of policing are totally different. There's advantages to contract policing and there's advantages to community policing. Both have their pros and cons. But I too think that we should have some kind of, at least have maybe our mayor and our chair of the police services board have a better understanding. Like I can understand why they don't want everybody to know, well, there's certain times of the day where we only have 2 police officers on, on duty. I can understand why they wouldn't want the general public to know what the best time to break into a store is. So I understand that they don't want that to be public knowledge. But I think there is some truth to the fact that we are paying for this service. We want to understand better, and please sit down with us and understand why you think that we have the proper coverage, or why we don't have enough coverage, or why we have more coverage than what we need. And how often is it that we are doing with less coverage because of the fact our neighbor needs additional police officers and they're give us a credit in the future? We're not even aware of that happening, and perhaps we don't want it to happen, but we don't even have that choice. So that's one of the things I think that need to be addressed. It's maybe not sharing it with our entire council or our entire administration, but I said mayor and chair of the police services, but also our CEO, Chris. I'm sorry I didn't include you there. I didn't mean to include you, but just to have a better understanding of what we do or don't have. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Just one other thing. Alex, great report. Loved it. Thank you.
Okay, we've been on this for a while. Councillor Verbeek, go ahead and we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think it's pretty clear by everyone's comments why we need to further have discussion after we're able to, look over the surveys, because clearly there's no agenda to wanting to see these. It will help us understand what the respondents have said. But I will say after 5 years on the police service board, and I see a number of you have served at various times with me on it, you all know, including you, Mr. Mayor, that we have asked numerous times for this information that we just keep getting stonewalled with. We were pushing for it when I first got on, and Morley, you were on it. So yeah, it's important information, and I'm really glad that council is all starting to get a little more aggressive in seeking these answers that we haven't been able to get. And maybe, Ms. Deputy Mayor, you are on the right path, that it should be perhaps, the chair and the CAO and such, just a few of us that get these answers, but we do need these answers. We've been asking this, not myself, I've only been chair for 1 meeting, but I've asked as just a member of the board numerous times for how many officers are on, how many we're getting per shift and such. So yeah, I'm glad we're going to push a little harder for that. My intent is definitely to bring back this survey and what council has has decided to how we're going to move forward with this information. And yeah, we have to bring it back to the police service board, so because it's very important for them to toss this around too. But this is two different animals. Yeah, we need to digest this survey and figure out what we're going to take with the information. But yes, as a whole, we have to be definitely united in our push to get some answers about our police service, because over as the police service board has changed tremendously just in these 5 years of members, we have not been successful in getting answers to some pretty basic questions. So I think we need to unite as council and push for these answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to add to that, Councillor Guerin, he hit the nail right on the head. I mean, we knew when we went Essex, we had so many officers on duty at once. Why can't we get that information? I'll say it again. Why can we not get that from the OPP? It's not right. So anyways, we had a motion on the floor, the motion.
Yep, just the main motion to receive, Mr. Mayor, moved by Councillor Verbeek, seconded by the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, all in favor of receiving the report? Thank you. It's carried.
8.8 this evening on the agenda is Planning Report 2020-13, site-specific zoning bylaw amendment for 128 Harvey Street, in lots 23 and 25 on Registered Plan 249. And this is together with authorizing bylaw 1923 for receipt, and that bylaw 1923 received 3 readings this evening.
Okay, we discussed this quite well tonight. Need a mover on this one?
Moved.
Councillor Vandendolen and Councillor Verbeek, any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you, Councillor.
8.9, Mr. Mayor, on the agenda is Capital Works and Infrastructure Report 2020-05, results of request for tender, surface treatment 2020, for receipt, and that council awards the request for tender to Shepley Road Maintenance Limited in the amount of $209,046.33.
Need a mover, please? Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Bjorkman, any discussion? All in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
8.10, Capital Works and Infrastructure 2020-06, results of request for tender, surface treatment rehabilitation 2020, for receipt, and that council awards the surface treatment rehabilitation to Norjon Contracting and Paving Limited in the amount of $1,097,501.
Need a mover, please? Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Bowman. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Item 10 on the agenda, any updates from County Council?
Do you have anything, Deputy Mayor? We haven't had a meeting for a while. We've got a meeting next 15th is our next meeting, so nothing there.
11.1 on the agenda, correspondence to be received on consent, that the correspondence listed in 11.1 be received and where indicated to further share such information.
Good. Mover, please. Mover, Councillor Bowman and Councillor Guerin. All in favor? Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, were we doing questions to any of those?
Yeah, go ahead. Do you see one you have a question on?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, make sure that council, there wasn't an opportunity to have questions. So my question is Union Water Supply System. Why do we, probably to our CAO or our union, probably to our CAO or our clerk, why do we get those minutes on our agenda?
Go ahead, Chris, can you answer it?
Through your worship, I guess just looking for clarification from Councillor Bonnie. Why wouldn't we?
Why wouldn't we? I don't know. we don't get the Elk minutes. And we're sole shareholder, so I don't know.
So we get them because they provide them to us, and you know, it's something that's I guess always been the case in terms of Union Water. Why it's different than Elk, that's something that we've talked about in terms of closed meeting minutes. So I guess to answer your question, why do we? They provide them to us and we supply them as 7%, or I think it's about 7, Councillor Vanderdolen now, 6 or 7. It looks like Kevin Gerard has some additional input here.
Go ahead, Kevin, can you add to that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, in addition to being a part owner of Union Water Supply, there is an obligation under the Drinking Water Quality Management System to provide council and keep council updated on our distribution network and our treatment network. You should be aware at the beginning of your term of council, you took standard of care training. That is part of that, and council's responsibility for a water system. So.
Thank you. Councillor Vanderdolen, you had something?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as a member of both those boards, Union Water and ELK, I have to point out that corporately they are completely different animals. They're not structured the same. ELK is a separate standalone corporation, and Union Water is a creature of the 4 municipalities that own it, and we own 4% of it, and all the information has to be shared with all 4 of the communities that own it. But that's different from ELK, which is proprietary and might not want to share that information with other non-people. But I want to point out that Union Water has been working for years on a plan to become a standalone corporation like a ELK, and have been laying the groundwork for that for some time, and have spent quite a bit of money on consultants, business managers, trying to figure out how this can be done, because it would make it easier for them to build and fund new water mains, especially to industrial greenhouses. They wouldn't have to go and ask permission from all 4 communities. They could just do it as a standalone. So that's a little update there.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything else on any of the correspondence? So all in favor of the correspondence? Okay, thank you.
11.2.1 on the agenda, it's correspondence for receipt or receipt and support, and it's correspondence from the city of Sarnia. That the correspondence from Sarnia dated June 24th, 2020, requesting support for its letter to the Premier, calling for or urging the Premier to begin the implementation of required resolutions to the problems that have been identified in the long-term care homes, either be received and supported, and if so supported, that the appropriate letter of support be sent.
Council, receive and report, Deputy Mayor Malash and Councillor Bowman. Okay, all in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Item 12 on the agenda, committee meeting minutes. That the committee meeting minutes listed in item 12 be received and adopted as certain.
Mover, please. Councillor Bjorkman and Councillor Bowman. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Item 15.1 on the agenda, the following notice of motion was first presented at the June 15th regular council meeting and is brought forward for council's consideration this evening. Councillor Bondi, the notice of motion as moved by Councillor Bondi, that council designate or request that council designate funds for the 2021 budget process to hire a consultant for a valuation of ELK Energy, being that it is a town-owned asset and knowing its value is important to our shareholders. Would require a second.
Councillor Guerin, you second that? Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Bondi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion's pretty self-explanatory. I think tonight with our audited financial statements, I think it's important for us to have some idea what our value of our asset is. And this doesn't necessarily have to be the way to find the value, but I think when I talk to our corporate Jeffrey Morrison, our Director of Corporate Services, he didn't really have an understanding either of the value. And this is one of our biggest assets in the town of Essex. You know, in February, we were supposed to have a meeting exclusively on this topic and to discuss the role and being an owner. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions. So down the line, you know, we may want to sell Elk Energy and do new roads or, you know, pay off debt. But, you know, we really don't know what we own. So just hopefully council will support it. Sorry, she's really cranky. Hopefully council will support it and we can look at the cost for it in the 2021 budget. You know, not this year, but we can look at doing it in the 2021 budget and get an idea of what we own. You know, maybe one day we don't want to own a hydro company. Maybe we want to, you know, do roads or something. I just think that there's so many unanswered questions, and maybe the next step is, you know, having a meeting to talk about some of those questions. So thank you.
If I can just add to that, Councillor Bondi, you said we might consider selling it down the road. I can't see us ever selling a business that makes us almost $1 million a year. And why would we sell a business that makes us $1 million a year and throw the money in the roads for 1 year, and then all that revenue year after year is not coming in any longer? That doesn't make sense to me. But I mean, that's your.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, we're not collecting dividends from it.
We're making profit every year off of it, Councillor.
But we're not collecting dividends. We need to understand.
We're still making profit. Go ahead, Councillor Vanendel.
Yes, once again, I think taxpayers may want to be suspicious of the motives here. I've heard somebody say at least 15 times, maybe we want to sell it. Maybe we want to sell it. Well, then maybe you should ask council if we want to sell it. But getting the value first, it's putting the cart before the horse. And I just want to point out to the ratepayers of ELK that if ELK is sold, the rates will go up sharply, because when you sell it, the buyers will have to recoup the cost of that company on the backs of the ratepayers, the customers of ELK. If you really want to entertain, well, let's raise all the rates on our townspeople, then yeah, let's rush ahead with this. But I think this isn't a good idea.
Deputy Mayor Malash, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not supporting the motion. I think that we should wait till the 2021 budget, bring it up again. I think defer it until that time. We don't know what costs we're going to have coming up. We don't know what kind of monies we're going to have. I don't want to commit. This is not something that's high priority for me personally as a councillor. But if we have the money to do it and there's enough support when we do our budget, so be it. But the true value of the assets are going to only be told when if we were actually to put it up for sale. Because right now you can value the what we have in brick and mortar and equipment and hydro poles and so on, but it doesn't tell you what you can get as a value of, and a lot of Elk's value is because of the potential income that you can get from the corporation. Right now, we may not be getting dividends because we're trying to pay down a loan from when we purchased in the first place. And that's why I'm saying the purchase value is what really is going to give us value, because whoever buys it's not going to buy it for the value of the building and the poles and the equipment that we have. They're actually going to buy it because of its potential earnings going forward. And we have no idea what corporation would come along and how much additional money they'd offer us on top of whatever the value is currently. So I think that we need to defer this. This is something that we don't need to spend money on right now, I don't believe. And if we want to have a discussion of whether we want to hold the asset or whether we don't want to hold the asset, that should be behind closed doors and determine what we want to do, and either be quiet on the idea, give it up, or move on in whatever direction we want to go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Guerin, go ahead.
Yeah, to me, it doesn't matter the timing on when we know what an asset that we own is worth. But I think as counselors, and we should want to know what an asset of ours is worth. I think that's what the real intent of the motion was. Whether you do anything with that asset really isn't what I was seconding. I was seconding just knowing what it is that we own and what the value is to us and what it's worth. I think I'd like to know that. Obviously, Leamington and Kingsville didn't see much value in it because they're not involved with it anymore. Unless I'm mistaken, it used to be owned by all three parties and we bought the other two out. So they obviously didn't see any value in keeping it. So to say that, we may never sell it, and it may be of no interest to anybody else. I don't think that's right. Some other municipalities were once involved and now they're not. So I think it's doing great for us. I mean, it looks on the reports, the dividends that could be or should be being paid out and how they're being paid out looks good. But I'd like to know the value of it for sure. I would. We're not talking about a pickup truck that we just bought a couple of years ago. We're talking about a pretty big asset.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? Councillor Verbeek, go ahead.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, for sure. I mean, how could we even talk about having the conversation that Councillor Vanderdolen spoke of as a council about potentially selling it at one point until we have a valuation? And yeah, it is a town asset. So we should want to know as a council what its value is. So my question is, how much would the consultation for valuation be? Like, what would one of those consultations run us to just get that information that we should all have and want? And I'm sure there's many constituents that would want to know the value as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other discussion on this? So we had a motion. Oh, Councillor Bjorkman, you had something. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, through your worship. Just to Councillor Verbeek's question, can anybody give us a ballpark? She's asking that question, I think, with regard to voting tonight. So does anybody in administration be able to just ballpark it, or is that something that's just beyond us right now?
Go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead.
Through the chair, just to provide clarity, going through the financial statements, you can easily identify what the book value is. But as Mike Cowan identified, that the book value is different than the fair market value. So the book value is easy to ascertain. The fair market value would potentially require I don't have an estimate on that. I can get one. I know that there's specific companies that value utilities. So I can have a conversation with Mike and I can have a conversation with others and I can get those prices and get back to you. I was having a discussion with the manager of finance today, and in her previous life as an auditor, she had done a valuation on a smaller business and they can get quite expensive. So looking at that example, it was about $10,000 for sole proprietorship. So I don't know, I'd probably, if I was estimating based on kind of what I've seen and knowledge, I'd say probably around $50,000, but don't quote me on it. I will go to my sources and I will get some better prices or estimates for us.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, so just to follow up. So I'm not going to vote in favor tonight to commit funds to this at the budget, but I'm certainly willing to look at it at budget time if we have an idea of the ballpark of what it's going to cost us. I got no problem with finding out, having a value on that. And again, that's one of those things, though, I'd be pretty keen on keeping it to ourselves. It would be a closed meeting item because that day you do want to sell, you don't want to do people's work for them. So I think we reserve this till budget time. It'll go on the list of things that we'll talk about and it'll make the cut or it won't. But I wouldn't pass it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I agree 100% with what you just said.
Mr. Mayor, amend my motion, please? That we get a quote to put in the 2021 budget for deliberations. So the motion is that council designate funds, but can we just make the motion, can council get a quote? So we can actually have a discussion in the 2021 budget about what we're discussing. Like, and the reason why this is important is, what if the buildings, poles, and equipment are run into the ground? And I'll just leave it at that.
Councillor Guerin seconded.
Yeah, I would second that amendment, that we at least have administration look into what it would cost to get a quote, and we can look at it at budget time. I'm okay with that. I'd just like to know one of these days what it's worth.
Thank you. All in favor of that motion? And what do we got here? We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Opposed? Opposed? 5. You had 5. It passes.
Item 15.3 on the agenda, as added this evening, is a notice of motion for presentment only, as moved by Councillor Verbeek, that council support local businesses through a grant fund funded from the council contingency fund that will pay up to half of the cost of newspaper print advertisements during the current declared emergency. And that's just once again for presentment only.
Thank you. Yep.
Item 17.
No reports.
Oh, my apologies, Mr. Chair. Item 16, any reports and announcements from the council members this evening?
Councillor Guerin, do you have anything?
Just a comment that I'm happy that the province moved Leamington and Kingsville into stage 2. It's a sign that things are improving in our area. And I'm happy for all the people in those municipalities, and especially the businesses that have been waiting long to get into opening up. So congrats.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman, anything? No. Councillor Bondi? Councillor Van Endolen? Do you have anything?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, I just want to announce the small good news that the Canadian Transportation Museum and Heritage Village got an emergency grant from the province. They've been just like other museums that are closed right now. They've been they've been struggling financially and with no revenue for months. And so it was very good news for the members, fans, and neighbors of the Transportation Museum. Thanks.
Good. Thank you. That's good news. Councillor Bjorkman, do you have anything? No. Deputy Mayor Malash?
Yes, just one thing quickly. Congratulations to the Miracle food drive that happened on June 27th, to all those that were involved. Can't believe the amount of food that they're going to get and that they got, and that we broke a world record that's way surpasses the last one. So congratulations again. That's it.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. Thank you for everybody that helped out from council. That was, you guys put a lot of time in that, and we really appreciate what you did. Councillor Verbeek, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. None from me, but our youth councillor, Cameron Susi, has stated he wants me to read, "Hi, I would just like to say for everyone to hang in there and things will get better soon. And just for everyone to be careful as we start to go into stage 2.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I have nothing. So go ahead.
Item 17 this evening, bylaws. Bylaw 1918 to provide for the James Shepley Drain Bulger Bridge for third reading this evening.
Mover, please, for that bylaw. Councillor Bowman and Deputy Mayor Malash. All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Bylaw 1922 to confirm the proceedings from the June 15th regular council meeting for third reading.
Mover, please. Councillor Bjorkman and Councillor Guerin. All in favor? Carried.
And for two readings this evening, bylaw 1930 to confirm the proceedings of this July 6th regular council meeting.
Mover, please. Mover, Counselor Guerin and Counselor Bjorkman, all in favor? And I need a mover to adjourn, please. Deputy Mayor Malage and Counselor Vandernoot. Thank you very much, Council. It was a long night and a lot of good discussion, a lot of debate, which is good for Council. Thank you. And thank you for administration. It was a long day for you guys and a lot of good reports. We really appreciate everything you put into it. Thank you.
Good night, all.